views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of Bronxnet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. Earlier today, President Trump had a press conference after his historic meeting with Vladimir Putin, where he took the side of the Russian leader over U.S. intelligence. We're going to talk about that tonight with a vice chair of the Democratic National Committee. We'll also ask him about immigration. There are concerns about reunification of children who were separated from their parents as a result of U.S. immigration policies. What has been the Democratic Party's response to those activities and policies? And did Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's victory over Joe Crowley in a Democratic primary in the Bronx signal a change in Democratic politics? And what are the prospects they indicate for the midterm elections? And then on a local level in the Bronx, there's been great concern over a significant spike in murders. We've got all that and more on our plate for tonight. We welcome back to Bronx Talk the Assemblyman from the Bronx's 79th District. That includes Concourse Village, Crotona, Claremont, Tremont, and West Farms. He's also, as I said, the vice chair of the DNC. Nice to have you, Assemblyman Michael Blake.
Gary, good to see you again.
Always good to see you. We were just talking before, a remarkable day and somewhat historic day, many people believe for the wrong reasons. What do you make of the United States president taking the side of the Russian leader over our own, people say his own, but it's really our own law enforcement officials?
You know, I conveyed, Gary, that I had the honor of serving a president myself for several years. My oldest brother is a retired Sergeant First Class in the Army for 29 years.
We should say you served with President Obama.
For 2.5 years in the White House, so close to 7 years in all capacities. Today was an absolute disgrace for our country. You know, we had a U.S. president that not only did he take the side of a thug, a criminal, a former KGB agent, someone who meddled with our elections, someone who has consistently done everything possible to disrespect our country, but he absolutely disrespected our national intelligence. He disrespected those that serve our communities. It was a disgrace in every level. And what we have to convey across the country and across in the Bronx, when people say, well, why does this matter for my everyday life? You know, why should I care about what's happening? Well, let me break it down in a few very quick aspects. You have a president that clearly conveyed in Donald Trump that our national security was less important to him than making sure he had a friend in Putin, one. Two, he conveyed that he, quite frankly, does not trust our intelligence. Two. Three, we have concerns about our elections, where not only was it just about the meddling with elections, you have that at least 500,000 Americans had data taken from them that the Russians have, that our own forces conveyed that occurred, and literally has done essentially nothing on that. We have to start asking ourselves, and especially asking the Republicans, do you care about the country or do you only care about your party?
What do you think it will mean long term in terms of, like, what happens next? The outrage has been pouring in from many corners of the country and the globe. But what is going to happen? The president has said things that have outraged a lot of people before. And he's proceeded and now gotten to a point where he had this international stage at an historic meeting, and that's still what his concerns are.
Well, I think there's multiple aspects. First, this is a reminder to everybody you need to go vote. And for anyone that is wondering, here in New York, we have the primary September 13th on the legislative aspect, but obviously in November is the national election. If you want to create changes, you have to be engaged in the process. What we have seen over the last year and a half is the presidency and administration has done everything humanly possible to disrespect this country, and quite frankly has conveyed that unless you are a straight white male of the top 1%, they're not going to help you, plain and simple. They conveyed on today a continual reminder that they're not trying to do anything in any aspect. What does it practically mean? We have to apply continual pressure as it comes to what's happening in Congress. This should be a continual reminder for everyone to be calling the members of Congress, and especially the senators, to say, how on earth can you move forward on a Supreme Court justice when you have a president that literally ignored moving forward on what happens when it comes to meddling? So there are some concrete things that we need people to be stepping up and moving forward on that we shouldn't be silent about. Lastly, when we think about what's at stake right now, we have a scenario where in every aspect, when it comes to tariffs, when it comes to immigration, when it comes to Supreme Court justice, when it comes to election meddling, anything that is hurting our country is clearly secondary to Donald Trump. And we would then say anyone that is supporting Donald Trump is complicit in his decision.
You know, this media, Bronxnet television, and this TV show, BronxTalk, is about the borough of the Bronx. You serve in the borough of the Bronx. You know we do not have a Republican elected leader in the Bronx. There are Republicans in the Bronx. They're seriously outnumbered by Democrats. I mean, it's just a matter of fact. So, you know, you talking to your constituents, me talking to the large majority of people who watch our TV show, are probably going to agree with you. I'm not saying everybody does, but they're probably going to agree with you. Yeah. The change, if there is a change, has to happen in these so-called hinterlands in this central part of the country. I don't have to list all the states that do that. How is this message that you just delivered going to be portrayed in those places so that people who aren't exposed to what we're exposed to will say, wow, maybe we should change the way we vote?
You don't have to go outside the state to have impact. You look at the congressional races when you see Antonio Delgado, who's a nominee for Congress, when you see Dana Balter in the Syracuse area, when you clearly see Anthony Brindisi running against Claudia Tenney, when you see Max Rose on Staten Island, you have at a minimum 4 very clear opportunities for us to have impact on the congressional level. And what does that practically mean? For everyone that I see within our district, I think about Clyde Thompson, who's just a phenomenal tenant association president and leader in our district, who says often, you know, keep pushing, you know, nationally, keep talking about what's happening here because it has impact. If we, as Democrats, are able to get back control of the House, that then means who's chairing hearings. That means subpoenas. That means we actually move forward on actions that are not being moving forward in any real aspect. Why is that relevant? Because you had the House Republicans literally say they weren't moving forward on the investigation and saying essentially nothing happened here, despite everyone else saying otherwise. Then you think about how you can have impact. You might live here in New York. You live in New York, of course. You can make phone calls and mobilize in other races where we have Senate races that are critical, whether they be in Arizona, whether they be in Nevada, whether they be in Tennessee. If you live in the Bronx, you're here in the Bronx, you know people all across our country. And what we have to say is today, this was a day where our country was attacked by our own president, where our president made a conscious decision that he, quite frankly, does not care about any of us, that he is more inclined to support Putin. And practically, what does that mean? It is not just about an election. It's about the security of our country. And so you don't have to just be engaged in one election here locally. You have the ability to have impact. That's the reason, lastly, Gary, we created an effort called I Will Vote, because quite frankly, regardless of your respective backgrounds, there was a 47 million person drop off between 2014 and 2012 from that midterm election, that presidential election. You think about the opportunity we can have to transform the game. If we can get 50 million people that typically don't vote in midterm elections, who may say I only vote in presidential elections to be engaged, that is how we can have our voices heard here in the Bronx and across New York.
In many of these cases, now maybe today was more dramatic than other cases, when the president has said things that conflict directly with Democratic Party principles or ideals, you wait for Democratic Party response. I saw Chuck Schumer, who's obviously, if not a leading Democrat, the leading Democrat. I saw him read a speech. His eyes were down. He was looking through his glasses. That's fine. Obviously, many people learn how to deliver speeches and be on TV and be in front. It was not a compelling picture, even if the words he was saying was correct. Do we have a problem with leadership in the Democratic Party to conceptualize those ideals that you're talking about for the rest of America, because we don't, I honestly don't see that on the national stage.
Well, I think you're sitting across one of the national leaders right now of the party. So I would say when we talk about...
But you weren't on TV on CNN when Chuck Schumer was on there. That's what the problem
Right,
is.
I wasn't on at that point, but I'll be on Fox tomorrow on Tuesday in particular reason because there are actually more Democrats in raw numbers that watch Fox and other networks. Now, to your point, do we need a broader conversation right now and a more aggressive rhetoric? Yes, we definitely need to be much more direct about it. I think, I would say, obviously I wasn't next to Senator Schumer, but I think it's safe to say it's hard for us to really process the magnitude of what happened today. You know, when you had White House staff that were off and on the record conveying to reporters that this did not go as planned, that they were shocked, they were surprised, they didn't make comments because they even themselves didn't realize it would be this bad. So I think when you're internalizing in this aspect, so when you think about who was out there, the conversations that were conveyed from Senator Schumer, from Congressman Eric Swalwell out of California, from many leaders across the country, and quite frankly, Republican leaders. You know, I think Senator John McCain's statements of saying it was an absolute disgrace and one of the worst presentations of an American president in our history is absolutely true. When you have Dan Coates, a former U.S. Senator, a former ambassador, the Director of National Intelligence, conveying again, we believe and stand by what we know, that meddling occurred. All of us should be speaking out and being engaged. And we're going to be very clear about this. You know, when we think about the next few months, Gary, today will be another reminder, the same way it was when it came to Charlottesville, same way when it comes to family migration, same way when it comes to health care, that Donald Trump, Mike Pence, Ryan, McConnell, and the Republicans in Congress don't care about what's going on in your livelihoods, and they proved that again today.
Let's talk about the another piece of history. This was Bronx political history. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez defeated one of the most visible Congress members in Joe Crowley. And then, of course, the question is, because she's become, like it or not, one of the most famous faces in Democratic politics right now, will this signal a shift in the direction, the policy direction of the Democratic National Committee, both nationally, and then, of course, we could talk about the local party as well?
Well, it won't signify a massive shift across the board because the policies that Alexandria was discussing and conveying in her election, we congratulate her, are ones that we have been and will continue to talk about as Democrats. Let's talk about economic justice. Let's talk about criminal justice. Let's talk about, obviously, what happens when it comes to health care and having universal health care and the access when it comes to that. You know, those policies are policies that we obviously agree to and amplify. You know, Alexandria put in the work. She worked on the ground. She mobilized on the ground. You can't ignore what she did. She connected with her residents. She connected with her constituents. She brought in energy, but she also conveyed how you connect technology with the people. How do you have a compelling story with the people? She's from the Bronx. You know, you can't ignore these dynamics that all happen here. And so this is a moment for us all to say, you know what, let's take a step back and recognize what happened here. She connected with the people, plain and simple. And that's not saying Congressman Crowley has not been serving his community and his district in a great way. However, let's be clear, it has variance in different districts. You know, what Alexandria did in Queens and the Bronx will have variance in terms of what happens in Pennsylvania with Conor Lamb. It has variance what happens in the South. But what she did is say very clearly, we have to be fighting for economic justice and equity and fairness for all.
I asked Marcos Crespo, who was here last week, this question. I'm going to ask you the same question. Do you think that Joe Crowley lost that election for the same reasons that Hillary lost? In other words, lost touch with constituencies that turned out to be important, took for granted poll numbers, and if you believe that's true, will the Democratic Party in local races take a different look at how they handle elections? The New Yorker had a fascinating piece on how she actually navigated that race and won it. And there were a lot of things that she did that haven't been done by Democratic leaders in the past.
I think those are very different elections. I think when you look at Alexandria, again, she put in the work, she knocked on doors, she was at the train station, she mobilized people. She had a message that connected with everyone on the ground in that aspect. I think there's very different nuances. You know,
can't every candidate learn from that across the country?
Well, I think every single candidate, Democrat, Republican, Independent, should learn that you should always be knocking on doors and mobilizing, connecting with people. So I think that's a resonating point in that aspect. I think to your question, how does it vary from the Secretary Clinton election? There's obviously dramatic differences. You're talking about a Democratic primary versus a Democrat versus Republican. And equally, you had different dynamics happening there. You know, you had a community of very conservative voters that wanted to mobilize with Trump. You had African-American voters in the South that are still very frustrated by the crime bill. There's a whole host of different reasons, so I don't think those are applicable. What I would say is applicable is you got to work to the end. You know, and I think about, you know, my own race in 2014. You got to work to the end. You can't take anything for granted. You can't just hope something will occur. But what we can learn, she had a very clear message. She had very clear communication, and she had a very clear framing of we have to fight for economic, health, criminal, community justice for all. That resonates and people can understand that.
The national conversation now is that this is now going to be an albatross around the neck of Democrats, because in the center of the country, where maybe they don't love Donald Trump, they still are conservative thinkers. And then they say, well, wait a minute, here's a famous Democrat who is being called a socialist. And all of a sudden they're going to say, you know what, we're not going that far. And they're going to either stay home or stay with the candidate they voted for last time.
And what they should worry about is that the Democratic Party has been flipping seats all across this country. There's a reason that you have Christine Pellegrino here in New York. There's a reason why you have Steve Stern here in New York. There's a reason why you have Doug Jones in Alabama and Mark Dinger in the state of Washington. You have Justin Fairfax and countless others in Virginia. Maybe they should focus on the fact that Democrats are winning and flipping seats. They can continue to focus on Twitter. We'll continue to focus on winning.
Let's talk about the immigration now. You were telling me, and I didn't even get the details from you prior to the show, you were telling me that you were involved in a committee meeting today about the status of some of the children. We did a show recently with one of the providers who's handling some of the children who are being cared for in the Bronx. What do you know? What can you tell us? Are there hopes of reunification for some of these children with their parents?
Well, you know, we've had progress. The fact that a federal judge conveyed again that the halting of deportations as families being reunited is clearly progress in that aspect. However, we have to convey this and call it what it is. This is a racist, discriminatory policy, plain and simple. There is no good reason why the Trump administration is moving forward on this. They made a tactical decision to continue to move forward in this aspect. When you see that millions of dollars being made by some of these nonprofits for the sake of holding on to migrant kids, it's absolutely inhumane and unconscionable. Here in New York, we know there are several nonprofits, several that we have tried to go visit, that we have not had an ability to have access into them. You look at Cuyahoga Center in East Harlem, you look at Lutheran Services, you look at Catholic Guardian, many of them that we have done formal requests for. This is not us just showing up hoping something would happen. Formal request where, to the federal government, if someone doesn't think that this is not racist and discriminatory, on the HHS website, it calls them alien children. No, they're human beings, okay? When we talk through the rationale, they then convey 14 days before they'll give you a response back on if you can potentially visit a site. Then on top of that, they'll then send you a notification of what are the sites they'll allow you access into. Now, to your question of is there hope? Absolutely. The fact that continual legal pressure is moving forward, the fact that you have many allies that are coming together, whether it be the Interfaith Center of New York, New York Immigration Coalition, Committee for Hispanic Children and Families, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have been all mobilizing together. When you think about the great work of Alita Garcia and Ford and what they've been doing down in Texas. When you think about RAICES, R-A-I-C-E-S Houston, which has been mobilizing, getting more funding in that aspect. When you think about Paolo Mendoza and saying, let's come together so we can help these families who have been struggling to get the funding to actually go and fly and reunite their families in that aspect, we can all be helpful. So if you want to help us in reuniting these families, please contact our office.
Your office?
Call us, 718-538-3829, 718-538-3829. We can then connect you on how you can apply to understand what's happening in terms of reuniting with families. And equally, if you want to provide services, whether it be food, goods, et cetera, there's ways to help the people that want to be engaged in these causes. I'm actually flying down to Texas myself this week. On Friday, I'll be part of a conference that's happening down there. But why are we doing that? Because we as a Democratic Party have been very engaged. You know, Tom Perez and myself had a press conference outside of one of the schools on Eagle Avenue, which is teaching some of the children that again, they wouldn't give us access into. We're going to keep fighting this, and we're not going to stop because these families have to be reunited, and we have to end the separation policy.
One of the things that we hear from Republicans about this president's immigration policies is, wait a minute, if you look at the numbers, President Obama detained more people at the border than any other president prior, and also separated children, et cetera, et cetera. Is there any conversation that would make sense to say, you know what, Donald Trump's policies are getting the publicity, President Obama did the same thing silently.
You know, one of the reasons I'm glad we settled the Affordable Care Act is because we can help the Republicans with amnesia. So let's make sure we're clear on the facts. So the separating of children that is happened under Donald Trump. Like, I'm sick and tired of these Republicans acting a fool and just congregating lies. Now, was there separation in terms of individuals that were coming here and where they're being detained? Was immigration policy strong in various aspects, not just under President Obama, but other presidents? Yes. However, the policy of separating of children is happening under Donald Trump, period. End of sentence, fact. So when we talk through how do we actually address what's happening here, let's talk about comprehensive immigration reform. Let's talk about how to reunite these families. Let's talk about the humanity of this. Help me to understand how Homeland Security, Health and Human Services, White House, ICE, all these different entities still do not have an ability and a policy to be able to unite families. If you go to the dry cleaner, you get a ticket for your clothes, but you can't tell me how you can find out where a kid is at. Stop talking about Obama. Stop talking about all these other distractions. Reunite these families and actually be a leader. And again, it is a reminder, elections have consequences. If you want to see things change, get these Republicans out of office because they're not going to do anything to help these families.
In 2013, the Senate passed a bipartisan immigration bill designed to address many of these issues, maybe to foreshadow so we don't get into the situation that we're in right now. And then it went to the House, and it couldn't get through the House.
Well, the Senate moved forward. You got to the
That's
House.
what I said.
Before, yeah.
The Senate passed the bipartisan bill, and it went to the House, and it stalled. Do you see that in this very charged climate as being ultimately the answer? So we can talk about what's happening with the families and the children and all that right now. But in order to really solve this, we've got to answer the call to get real legislation that everybody can agree on. Is that possible in this incredibly charged environment?
No, because most of the Republicans that are sitting there are complicit racists. We just got to call it for what it is. Like we could keep dancing around what's happening right now, Gary. The reality is, yes, I served under President Obama. One of the things we should have gone further on is on comprehensive immigration reform when we had the House and the Senate. No question about it. But help me to understand the rhetoric from them where they keep conveying we can make these changes. They have the presidency, they have the Senate, they have the House. They have all the ability right now. They receive decisions from the Supreme Court just this year that open up more opportunities for them. There is no good reason why they can't move forward on this, other than you don't want to, other than you don't want to help these families, other than the fact that if someone is of color, you don't want to help them. Ask the Republicans now, help us to understand. You have the White House, you have House, you have Senate, you have a Supreme Court that is favorable towards your decisions. Why can't you get this done unless otherwise you don't care?
Let's talk about some local issues, and I mentioned it at the top of the show. Bronxites are incredibly concerned because after a period of time of crime numbers and murder numbers going down, we have had a significant spike in murders in the borough of the Bronx. City of New York, but the Bronx really has taken a big hit. What are your thoughts, especially since you work in a community that has many challenges?
Well, we have to, first and foremost, continue to make sure we keep our focus on the families. So for Junior's family, for the family over at Castle Hill, for the families that have been going through these challenges, let's make sure we're continuing to be with them even when the cameras are gone, and not be quiet in these moments. Dr. King said often, in the end, we will not be remembered by the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. So we can't be silent right now. So if we want to address what's happening, let's address it in totality. Let's make sure these young people actually have jobs. Let's make sure these young people have educational pathways. Let's make sure these young people actually have after school and summer programs. Let's make sure that we're addressing trauma in our communities. Hakeem Yamani, who talks about this all the time, what are we doing to address trauma? Let's make sure we're actually helping these communities on the ground and providing support in different aspects, in all aspects. At the end of the day, we say often in our office, your block won't block your blessing, your zip code won't deny your destiny, but you have to make sure you provide resources and opportunities and a pathway to do so. So if we want to address what's happening in a lot of these communities, address it on the front end. This is no different than our previous topic when we're talking about migration and immigration. People are not leaving these countries because everything is so wonderful in these places. They're leaving because they want to seek opportunity. In the same way we should be accepting and helping people to get accustomed to our communities here is the exact same way we should be helping these young communities and our communities in the Bronx and across New York City and across New York State get jobs, get access, get opportunities, and quite frankly, the policies also have to change. Why is it that we still have it, that we won't get open discovery done, so that the defense can actually know what the prosecution has against them. Open discovery and criminal, this whole discovery for justice, which is a critical effort from Carmen Rivera and so many others, has to change. Let's get speedy trial done. Let's get bail reform done. Let's focus on these different efforts. This has to be done in totality so that we can get focused in talking about it before, during, and after. Instead of us only talking about what happens when the kid has lost their life, let's make sure we're actually focusing on stem cells rather than jail cells.
Governor Cuomo came up with $18 million for youth services, many community centers. How do you view that? That's a good thing.
It's a good thing. It's essential. If we continue to talk about how you help someone with a book bag instead of a dime bag, you can help provide more opportunities in that aspect. So when you see these nonprofits, let's support these nonprofits. In addition to that $18.8 million, there was a $10 million downtown revitalization initiative that was launched about 3 weeks ago. We were honored that was announced within our district at Boricua College, and what Dr. Alisay and their team are doing remarkable things. But all of these nonprofits need to get support in our different communities. You look at El Maestro, which is doing great boxing work on Southern Boulevard. You look at Here to Here, 149th Street, what Abby Jo Siegel and Judy Diamond are doing to get kids and give them opportunities. You think about Dream Yard with Jason Duchin. You think about how all these new groups are coming about, from Bistro and Bronx Draft House and Bricks and Hops, which are creating their restaurants and their businesses, but then giving back to the community. We need to do that to help in a real way.
I got time for one last question. You're an assemblyman, you're running for re-election, you're unopposed at this time. People hear you speak about national issues. Should they be concerned and say, you know what, here's a guy who's got his vision on Washington, D.C. instead of his home district of the Bronx, and say, you know what, he really would rather be a national figure or doing national politics than Bronx politics and serving the Bronx. Talk to me about how you see yourself, your career, and your political agenda long term.
Well, I'm a Jamaican American, so we're used to having multiple jobs. That's what we do in our community. So let's talk about what I've done in the community. We focus on the 3 E's of economic development, education, and equity. And when people ask me what is my priority is helping people in the community. It's the reason why we help that Concourse Village. It's the reason why we help these local schools. It's the reason why we're training young kids who otherwise didn't have opportunities. The Involve program, which is entrepreneurs who otherwise weren't getting that zero interest loans.
We're going to run out of time. You're still interested in doing that job?
Oh, absolutely. I'm here, and I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to continue to be here on the ground.
Michael Blake, thank you so much. We enjoy the conversation with you, and we will invite you back as things happen. And good luck in the election, although at the moment unopposed. We'll just see how it turns out.
And go Yankees, of course.
There you go. Folks, thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, you can send us an email at BronxTalk@BronxNet.org. Our Twitter account, is at BronxTalk. You can post them on our Bronx Talk Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. We have a tremendous show for you next week. Bronx percussion great Bobby Sanabria has come out with a CD of his performances of West Side Story Reimagined. We're going to introduce you to that groundbreaking work, and we're incredibly excited about our second guest next week. It'll be Maestro Leonard Bernstein's daughter. He, of course, was the musical genius behind West Side Story. His daughter, Jamie Bernstein, has penned a memoir about a famous father. She'll join us next week as well. Should be a memorable show. Bobby Sanabria and Jamie Bernstein, wholly different from what we've done tonight. Thank you to producer Helen Greenberg and our director William Guzman. Nick does a great job. The cast of thousands. Thank you to the Assemblyman. We'll see you next week. Good night.